Hello and welcome back to the White Cube podcast. I'm ZM and we've got another episode for you this week that is special, interesting, exciting content. This week's episode is a recording from an event I did a couple weeks back at Sirius, an art centre in Cobh in Ireland when I was over there. It is a conversation between myself and Holly Márie Parnell, a filmmaker, a friend, and just a totally beautiful person. This conversation between me and Holly is mostly about a film Holly made called Cabbage, and it is currently being shown at Sirius. So it's on until the 15th of April. So you've got about 2 weeks if you're catching this on time to go see it if you want to. If you can't make it over, then no worries. That's what this podcast is for. Hopefully we will do our best in filling in blanks and also giving you a bit of context if you haven't seen the film. But this should hopefully just be a really interesting chat with a filmmaker and an interesting person. So I'm going to really quickly give you a blurb for Cabbage, and then I'm going to play some excerpts from the film. So the blurb is from the Berwick Film Festival programme, where the film was recently shown, and it says that Cabbage is an intimate film made in collaboration with Parnell's family. Cabbage looks at the complexities of bodily autonomy within an ableist paradigm, taking place in the months leading up to an international move from Canada back home to Ireland, a country they had to leave a decade prior due to severe cuts in disability services. The film focuses on her brother David's writings, using eye-tracking technology and her mother's memories to explore how we shape a sense of self under the pervasive weight of unspoken assumptions and fixed definitions that get placed onto bodies. Dissecting layers of language, agency and power, the film is a subtle examination of how a human life is measured and valued. And the excerpts I'm going to play are coming up next, and the first one is an audio clip from the film where David is using said eye-tracking technology to address the camera. It's the same eye-tracking technology that he uses to write, and his writing appears in the film. I think this might be it from a clip where Holly is speaking to David and they're having a conversation back and forth, but his writing also appears as texture and material that the film interacts with throughout the film. And then the next clip is from June, Holly's mum, sorting through medical documents and speaking to Holly behind the camera, and it's a back and forth. And then we'll get into the conversation, not the Q&A, the main conversation. And there are clips from David and Gabrielle, who contributed to the conversation between. It wasn't just me and Holly chatting, it was also Gab and David, neither of whom were present in the room, but there in other ways. Hopefully this is interesting, and hopefully you enjoy it. I'll catch you at the end. Goodbye.
I want to ask a question. 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 Tell me yes or no, I want to ask a question. Tell me yes or no, I want to ask a question. Yes, this is how I say yes, this is how I say yes, that's funny, that's funny, that's funny, this is how I say yes, that's funny, this is how I say yes.
Change the subject.
Do you want me to start filming?
No, I meant something else. I'm going to start again.
It's always quite interesting when you see these old, professional notes about David. It's so interesting how these are all just captured like this on a piece of paper. Yet none of it really captures the These are all the documents that way back in 1990 when David first took ill, they were shortly after we were able to take him home, and after having those just really negative conversations with some of the doctors about his future and sort of that kind of sense of just writing him off, that I just felt, no, I need to get all the information possible. So I'll take what they have, and then I'll work with that and work with what I know as his mother, and with him moment by moment, you know. These psychology ones are so... They have this testing scale, and I mean, who are any of us ever fit onto a type of scale? I don't know how you can measure the essence of being human on a scale, but...
Okay, so hello, thank you for having us. I'm gonna open up by asking, I know we've just watched the film, but can you tell me super quickly what happens and what people can expect to see, listen to, think about, because I'm aware that we're recording for people that might not have seen it, and also just generally.
Yeah, so this is a film that is basically a triangle between me, my mother, and brother. Me as the filmmaker behind the lens, David and his words and writing that he uses, that he writes using eye gaze technology, and that's threaded throughout the film, kind of the backbone of the film. And then intimate conversations with my mother, spent over a couple of years of collecting.
Can you tell me a little bit how this film actually came together? How did you make it? What does your workflow look like? And what was the process of putting it all together?
Yeah, well, this is the first actual single channel film I've made. It's funny speaking to you like this because you know my work and you know, so like, but for anyone who doesn't, I guess, know, this is my first single channel film. So before that, it's mainly been live video performances and installations that I've always drawn on like loads of fragments using my phone as my main source of recording device. Yeah. And so for me, I'm always like collecting, whether it's field recording like sound or just like fragments of little things happening. That's like how I work. And then I suppose, and this was also the first time that I like upgraded to like a nicer camera, I suppose. And that decision was purely because I was filming so much indoors as well. And there was like literally details of words on a page that I wanted to capture that like the phone couldn't do. So I was thinking I should probably learn how to use an actual camera. And so it was interesting. So the process of bringing in a bigger camera was more like, how can I make this feel as much like my phone as possible? And as much like, because the phone basically felt like just another appendage that was really easy to collect things because it didn't interfere with like the intimacy or the authenticity of the moment. Because like cameras are like bodies, right? And so when they get bigger and they can change like the atmosphere of a space. So I was always trying to figure out how to make that as small as possible. I actually completely forget your question. I don't know where I'm going.
No, the question was rubbish compared to what you just said.
I'm floating somewhere. I don't know where I'm floating.
No, ignore the question, but you said something really interesting about how cameras are like bodies. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, well,
that was like the best thing I've heard all month. Like
no, but they have their own energy and they affect people act different in front of them, whether they enjoy to be in front of it or are scared of it. And it's interesting, when I was learning how to use a nicer camera, I suppose I was like learning on all these YouTube channels and all these like mainly men on the YouTube channels teaching cinematography, and it was all about how to make your rig bigger and how to expand your rig, and so that when you go in on set, you're like look more professional because your rig is bigger. And it was just, I could not find like any YouTube channel that was like the inverse of that.
Yeah,
So I would just take what they were saying and try to inverse it and learn it. Like, how could I make my setup as small as possible to create that, like, so it could be a body that just felt like an extension of my hand as well. And especially because I work in terms of like collecting, I think this is the beginning of where your question actually was how I pieced it together, but because I work in collecting fragments, and just I always have to have some sort of recording device because I don't like to set up a scenario. I like responding to one that is like something exciting is happening and there's a resonance, and I think, oh gosh, this has to be captured, and that can only be done when something's on you all the time. So that was a learning curve in terms of how to bring that into that relaxed environment.
Yeah. But like, how long did it take you to collect the footage that makes up this film? Like, from start to finish?
Year and a half.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was because we were in the middle of this move. And also the move back to Ireland was more of a contextual background thing that I wanted to include in the film, that was just more placed the characters within that context, within that shifting context. But there's also something, when you're looking at this subject matter, it wasn't like, oh, I'm just looking at this one part of the story or this. I kind of wanted to look at like all the different layers, and I just felt that them being batting back and forth, like ping-ponging twice because of like cuts to disability services was just like this absolute absurdity that like I wanted to include, but just have it in the background rather. So that's what kind of started the film. It's like my mom was literally going through old things and deciding what to keep and give away, and I was thinking, and it was
So that's like background and also like inciting incident that kind of...
Oh, I never thought about an inciting incident.
No, yeah. Maybe this is like writer brain, like kicking in, like...
No, but
filmmaker
Gabrielle and I talk about like story structure all the time. So yeah, maybe that's the inciting incident.
Yeah. Not to narrativize it, not to turn it into like some big grand narrative.
But everything has story.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't just exist in narrative or film. It's like even this moment will have a start and an end.
And it doesn't have to be...
And a climax and a denouement.
Yeah, not necessarily linear. I love that, yes. Okay, so this is not just like a Q&A in convo, this is a multimedia presentation, because Gabrielle isn't here, David also isn't here, and we are going to play some clips from both of them in conversation as well as us having a chit-chat now. So, there's a question from Gabrielle for David, but I'm going to ask you it of you now first.
Oh, okay.
What is your favourite bit of the film?
Jesus.
Quick fire. Oh my god, think fast.
Jesus.
This is a difficult question, I think.
Probably the reason why the film's called Cabbage. I like that scene with my mum, just where she's like, there's just something powerful about her revisiting those documents and being like, fuck them. And she's only in that place of like power and resilience because of time and because of living such a long, she's in her 60s and has lived a long life with this, in this situation. So I think like the fact that she was like, time becomes a material in this as well, because she's like looking back and being able to analyze something from over 30 years ago. And I think that like time is powerful in that scene for me.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good answer. That was... Okay. Oh no, accidentally just changed the file name. Okay.
Hello to the audience. I'm not in Cobh, unfortunately. I'm in bed in Liverpool with COVID. But I've got some questions for David and he's already answered them. So question number 1 is, what was your favourite bit of the film?
Through my eyes. Through my eyes.
I just want to ask you a question now off the back of David's answer. And I don't know if I'm reading between the lines or like inserting subtext that isn't there. But are there parts of the film that you had to shoot through, not your eyes or your camera, or like a camera as your eyes, but through his eyes? Like, did you have to vacate your perspective and enter into a completely different space? What was that like?
Yeah, no, I quite literally did that. Like, I took the lens and I would like follow his eye movements. I don't know if that's way too literal or not, but I just felt it was far more interesting than just like filming him experiencing a moment, but how to really use a lens to film as a medium to its capacity to be able to like try and inhabit someone else's perspective. Yeah.
What was that like though? Because you're not just the filmmaker, you're also David's sibling. Like, did that feel like those two categories collapsing into each other, or like was there like a clash, or how did that feel?
I think because I'm the sister and the daughter and the filmmaker, it allowed me obviously access, but not just access, but time spent in the minutiae of daily life, where these nuggets of wisdom like seep through in really casual ways. And I think for me, that is the space of the real, and that is what I'm like always trying to tap into when I'm making something. So it was like such a gift to be able to make a film with people I'm so close with because of that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Like, it feels like it's that bridging the distance, right? Like filling the space between. That makes sense. It's interesting.
Because people would think, I've had that question before, like, oh, you're so close, how did you create then the distance needed as a filmmaker? I was like, I don't believe in needing distance as the filmmaker.
No, that's interesting. I wonder though if those are the bits that feel like a collaboration. Maybe then this is a smooth segue into talking about this film as a collaborative work.
Yeah.
Are those the parts that feel collaborative?
Yeah, like I was saying to you earlier, like the film feels like this triangle, like between the three of us, and if you take one part of it away, it would just collapse and not be the same thing. And I think that's really important, especially with giving David his voice, and not that I'm giving him his voice, but like elevating the way he speaks to an audience. It was absolutely necessary that it wasn't just my project or my gaze, but like really, really equal, you know?
Yeah, three different voices speaking, I guess.
Yeah, I really, really do feel like I was just the filmmaker there with the camera and made the editing choices, and David was there with his words creating like the backbone of the film, and my mum's like memories and the way she speaks was like really powerful, and that's all just words coming out of her mouth, and I'm just there with the camera. Yeah, so it 100% felt like a strong unit. Not like,
Yeah,
so.
that's maybe then this is a better segue into talking about David's writing, because I've got some questions. Maybe first I want to ask about how his writing is technically or practically facilitated. Can you tell us about the eye gaze software that he uses?
Yeah, so the eye gaze software, it tracks his retinas. So it picks up the movement of his eyes and essentially works like a mouse, like if you were on a computer and using your hand, but his eyes would just be that mouse tracker. And then if he holds his eyes on either a letter or a pre-made word for a certain amount of time, then that comes up. And then his fastest way of communicating is through pre-made sentences. So he does use that the most. And he does type words as well, but it takes much longer. But a lot of the poetry and things that he writes are made of these pre-made sentences. And I kind of love that, like what he's able to do with what he has, with what's already been made, what he's able to say in those pre-made lines.
That is a good segue into
Gab's
Gab's second question. Bear with me while I faff.
My second question is that I find that I communicate quite differently if I'm typing on my phone versus my laptop versus speaking to someone face to face. And I kind of want to know how David thinks this technology, the eye gaze technology, shapes his communication. Like, can he write in his own phrases, for example, or is it all chosen by the machine? Does he find himself thinking faster than the machine, or is it okay? How does he feel about the automated voice? And apologies if this is too many questions in one. It's just something I've been thinking about in terms of like the parts of Cabbage where David repeats himself when he speaks, which I imagine he doesn't just do for the film, but does on the daily. Like, it allows him to spam a message in a way that we don't do with our mouths, and I just think it's an interesting quirk of the technology.
I want to talk about it. 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 Oh. To who? To who? Who? Who?
Well, no, maybe it's a question for you as well, because I know everything. I'm a snooper, and I caught a clip of you talking about having used the eye gaze software yourself. So maybe this is something that you can speak to in your experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, as a family, we've all like tried it just to be aware of like what it's like for him, and it's like incredibly difficult to use and incredibly tiring as well, and a bit frustrating because you have to like focus so hard, and then mistakes are made and you have to like look away quickly before it does the wrong thing, and it's so he doesn't just use it all day long and have it all the time. It can be a frustrating tool, and I also find that interesting. This is just one mode of communication. He has lots of other ways to communicate non-verbally, like through facial expressions and sounds, and that's how we've communicated with him as a family, like our whole lives, up until he started learning this technology. So we're fluent in his language. So it's just interesting now that with this new technology, people are like, oh my God, he's communicating. How I find that another interesting layer of like him having to like prove his humanity in a way, that this sort of helps people even get to that place, which is shouldn't even be necessary, but we're just like, oh, I can understand that word, okay, oh, that's something I hear. But yeah, so that's interesting to me as well, that tension. But because it's clunky and awkward as well at the same time.
Yeah.
And his language with us that's outside of that framed system is much more fluid, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was something you were talking about earlier, that it kind of exists within this framed system, and it kind of, it's this other entity or this other material that has to be that has to fit into the requirements of this software that obviously has like a designed user experience and outcome in mind, right? Like I'm going to play a third question now from Gabrielle and an answer from David.
Question number 3. In terms of bodily autonomy, has David's relationship with medical professionals changed since beginning use of the eye gaze technology? I.e., do they treat him less like the title of the film because of his language now? And I ask that because, so last year, my nan was in hospital for about 6 or 7 months, and she had a stroke, and the doctors were telling us to, get ready. She was probably going to die. But while she was in there, over the course of a few months, she suddenly regained the ability to speak. And the theory is that when she was in there, they took her off the antidepressants that she'd been on for a few years. And suddenly she was like coherent. And it meant that even though physically not much had changed besides this coherence and this new language that had returned to her, the doctors suddenly decided to like take her seriously and move forward with treatments that they'd held back on, because they seemed to say that, they'd written her off, they'd given her the Cabbage treatment, and then when she could speak again, they like gave her an operation and she was able to actually come out of the hospital, and she's like still here today. And yeah, it just has made me think a lot differently about language and respect, and how dark that can be between doctor and patient.
I know it. I like that. I know it. I know it. I know it. I understand. I know it.
Okay, I'm gonna...
It's nice having Gabrielle's ghost here.
It is. Don't talk about the ghost, because I'm
yeah,
convinced
this place is haunted. I don't know if
I'm
anyone else knows
convinced.
that.
I saw a ghost last night. Not to segue, but I'm convinced I saw a ghost last night. Yeah,
the downstairs is well known. It's haunted.
So many ghosts. Oh my God. Don't. Multimedia presentation between us and the spirit world. Oh my God. But right, just want to shift gear now, rather than talking about language and like capital L language as well, like all caps language, explicit, like hard and fast language. Maybe talk about some nitty-gritty filmy bits, because filmmaker, I want to ask, well, this is kind of about language and film, this question. I want to ask about how David's writing sat against the visual content that you shot, and like maybe how his writing related to the footage. Was he writing first and you were responding to it, or was he responding to the bits that you were shooting, and like, I don't know, was there a bit of a back and forth?
Well, it's hard to like pinpoint, because I'm always filming. Like I actually have to like apologize to my loved ones, because the camera's always on, and not in like an artistic sense always, maybe in a home video sense, just it's always there. So I don't know in like the hard line of like but with his writing, I suppose that came first, because it was that writing that made me that actually inspired the project. Because I don't know if other people feel this, but when I see David's writing, it feels like it has an outward projection that he's asking the audience. Like it creates an active relationship with the viewer, as if these questions are for the viewer, or maybe they're for no one, or maybe he's just speaking to like what you can't even put your finger on. And I always think about that too, in terms of like these knowledge systems that get made, or these like authorities, like even the people my mom's like talking about, like you sort of can't even pinpoint where that like power is coming from. But yeah, so his words, either they sort of feel like soliloquies in a way, in theater, when the actor just stops and starts to like talk to the ether, and then that felt like a really nice moment to me that inspired the film, and then what the things that I wanted to film, and knowing that I didn't want to just like film it as in document it, but really try and get like somatic with my filmmaking and my relationship with like his words, so that it could like move beyond just a space of pure language, and be trying to communicate something a bit more in terms of like the body. Yeah.
Can you say more about that? Like the I don't know if somatic is like an adjective. Normally, but the somaticness, like, that's not a word. Can you speak more maybe about the somatic quality that the film takes on? Like, is it?
I guess, like, the moments that I had spent with David, I try to, like, tap into what is the experience of that moment. And for David, I think there's when he's in that space, because he's in this body that is always being stared at and equally always ignored. So he's hyper aware, and I think his writings are hyper aware of the body and what that means to inhabit a body that is different. And when he's in his favorite thing is to just be in nature. And when I think about that, like, more deeply, I just think that, like, it's a place where he doesn't need permission to just be and to just exist, and to have to prove anything. And I think that's a space of somaticness.
Somaticness. There must be a word for that. Like, somaticness isn't a word, but there must be a word that I'm missing. Can't think of it.
I guess somaticness is like feeling connected beyond language. That's how I feel like it. Connected to the nature universe, or connected to, like, the world around us without having to use words. That's what it means to me, but maybe I have the definition wrong.
No, maybe it's about a groundedness that, like, kind of like that cerebral headspace of, like, language and like, things that you can understand verbally. That's really cerebral and, like, above our heads. But, like, the opposite of that probably is, that groundedness that you're speaking to. Yes. This is really just a process of me understanding things.
Dictionary.com.
Yeah. And there's... Okay, so this isn't a clip from Gabrielle. I'm going to now enter her headspace. No, I'm going to become a ghost, and Gabrielle, the ghost, is going to possess my body. I'm going to ask this question as Gabrielle. She says, I don't think this is a film about disability. It feels like a film with it. I don't mean that to sound like an arty, silly term, but more like a lot of art with disability as its subject matter is a bit like, wow, look at this person. Aren't they horrific or inspirational or educational? And that doesn't feel like the invitation here. It feels more level. Now, this would have been a clip that's more like a comment than a question, but I want to offer you...
Yeah, no, I like that, because this isn't a film about disability to me. This is a film about ableism. It's asking people to question this ableist paradigm that we're in. So I'm not looking at, like him being really inspirational, or it being sad. Like, sure, like, all these things exist in that constellation, but the film is not about that. The film is about the space where you reclaim power in this system that's, like, quite suffocating. So I like that she tapped into that, but not. Yeah.
And that, like, identifying that. I then want to ask a question for you about maybe filmmaker, like, head on. Were there choices that you made to engage with the subject of your film in a way that was maybe more careful, more tender, more... And I'm like, that sentence is worded in a really cold, like, technical way, because I'm saying, like, subject, engage, choices even. But, subject of your film is David, your brother, and, like, your mum.
Yeah.
And do you think...
Yeah, sorry, do you want to finish what you're... I just
No, it's gone.
No, but when I was in Berwick a few weeks ago, saw this film called Acarante by Manuel Munoz Rivas. I think I butchered it, but and then his Q&A after, I just really, his words really resonated with me when he said that filmmaking for him is a gesture of love, and he likes to film the people in his life that he loves, almost to, like, save them from the erosion of time. And that, not that is that relevant, but this thing about gesture of love is, like, 100% how I feel about filmmaking. Like, I'm really not... There's a lot of shit to, like, critique in this world, and especially in the art world, we kind of hang on to that, like, space of, like, the things we want to share that we feel are wrong with the world, but I think we can talk about that from a space of love as well. And like, I want to choose to like film and be with subjects that like offer something to this world that is in a space of like joy as well and love. And that being like a political position as well. That makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. And that's really profound as well, because I feel like at the moment I've really been thinking a lot about who we monumentalize, or like the act of like documentary or like image making, or like who gets to be like documented and how that happens, right? That feels like it contains potential to be a space of like tenderness, care, love, and all these, and maybe saying like, oh, you know, this is an act of, I feel like the word care has been like a real curatorial buzzword.
Oh, I know. You know what I was thinking the other day? I was thinking like, for the White Pew bingo, you guys haven't done an artist statement bingo?
Yes, I know.
Bingo?
Well, like curator bingo, because I feel
get
like
somatic in there, get slippage.
Policy. There was a year, I think it was 2021.
Care.
Curators were like, just would not stop talking about policy. And it's like, I'm interested in policy, but not anymore. You've made it like pedestrian. And we should, right, note to self, cut that bit out of the recording.
No, keep it.
I'll leave it as like a, yeah. But I think that care kind of often turns into aphorism, right? Or like tweet. Like it turns into like a Twitter word that you can just throw out into the world and like expect that it kind of hits someone as a shorthand that everyone knows what you mean. But I don't know, like it kind of has real tangible meanings, and like you're doing a real tangible thing by like documenting someone, and that's the act of love and like remembering, right?
And like depending on like what angle you focus on care can be really disabling as well. Like if you were to like, I obviously had those conversations with myself to like not show any like physical care side of David's life. It just wasn't necessary.
Yeah, and these all feel like specific choices that you made through.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier, and it was about you said something about how you opened only with like really tight shots of David, like those shots outside.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I wanted to make sure in the beginning of the film, and I had these conversations with David as well, that we didn't want to just make that easy for the audience to just open the film and be like, this is a film about a boy a man in a wheelchair. It was important that David was able to like confront the audience with his words first, and you even see like the surrogate body of like the wheelchair, which is another body in and of itself, before you even see David in it. And I think that was important for David as well when we had these conversations, that he felt like he had some control over like the narrative, because he's also playing with people's, like, in my opinion, his writings are playing with and speaking to people's subconscious as well. So even though we're like, no, I wouldn't actually think that, it's like there's stuff in our subconscious that we haven't even learned to unlearn yet, that I think he's wanting to play with.
Yeah. That's I have a question that's not a question. Maybe I'll put a pin in it, but like what you said about how his writing kind of engages with the subconscious, or like there's not a question there, that's more of a comment than a question. Maybe I'll come back to that. Are there other films or filmmakers who you've looked to as not inspiration in that like, oh my god, inspiration way, but like have you taken cues from other filmmakers or like other bits out in the world?
Well, you know this, but my favourite filmmaker is Payal Kapadia, and I think I don't know, it's funny, the inspiration, because I think anyone who's works in a certain way will always like find their orbit of people that are also like on that wavelength, but you're not necessarily like making things in the same visual language, but it's just your approach to like, even like Jonas Mekas, like I adore this man who recently passed away, but he's a Lithuanian filmmaker who used to just film everything and he was from Lithuania but lived in New York. And just that approach that he used to say, like, I'm not a filmmaker, I just film. And then, so this approach to just collecting, and like collecting the minutiae of like every day as being like, was quite powerful. But I too, when I look at Pael's films and her short films and the way she said this thing that was really interesting. She said that the short film's like a haiku, and that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think she does that really brilliantly, where she is quite confident the way she'll only like reveal a few things in such a short space, but create this like really profound, heavy and whole piece. And I think that's inspiring for me. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about who my favorite filmmakers are, but I don't think it would be like, oh yeah, that's where I've gotten all my. I think for me, it's like filmmaking's like really, really intuitive. Like the decisions come from like a really like gut place, and I always feel like even when I was like younger, when I was trying to emulate, if I was trying to emulate someone else, it was just absolute shite. So I feel like people make the best work when it's like you almost like it's come from nowhere but your gut.
Yeah, it's that someone, I can't remember who, someone recently in vague proximity of me, in my earshot, has said something about how it's that thing like, say like Maria Lasnik, right? Like she's really good at being Maria Lasnik, and like trying to, that act of emulation, you're never going to be as good at being Maria Lasnik as Maria Lasnik is. Because she's Maria Lasnik, you can't compare, but you can like do the best version of being yourself, and like that impulse, it's located in the gut, right?
Yeah, no, you should never want to be anyone but yourself. It's so true.
It's cliche, but it's true. I think it is, especially with making and like speaking about the camera as like a part of your body, or like an appendage.
But yeah, and anything you make too, like everything, not to sound like a hippie, but everything has like an energy, so you can like tell too when something's been made and it's not being authentic to itself, or it's trying to be something else, or it's trying to do that, or sort of, you can like feel that, like the person experiencing that can like feel exactly where that thing, in what kind of like space that thing has been made. I believe that anyway. I feel that when I approach works, that I can like feel.
No, but is that something that like
how it's been made?
Is that like a logic that runs in and around your own work, like when you're approaching like maybe the process of like sorting clips and figuring out a nice order for editing? Because it sounds like that's a very separate process to shoot in.
Yeah, and when I'm like experiencing other work too, like the thoughts of like, is this good or bad, never goes through my mind. It's just like, do I believe this or not?
That's a much nicer question to ask yourself as well. Like,
yeah, and you have to ask that of yourself as well. Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, we're learning so much. Actually, speaking of learning then, what have you learned in the process of making this film? Like, is there learning that you would take with you or leave behind into the as you go into the next project?
Someone asked me this at the last screening.
Was it Gabrielle?
I don't remember now.
I think it was.
But actually, didn't know what to say, and I still like don't really.
Oh no, she's bamboozled you twice.
Again,
I think it was Gab.
She's done it twice to me.
I mean, it's fine if like it's because maybe then the answer is like that learning process hasn't quite. It's not kind of come to.
I think I learned how to make a beginning and an end, because it's the first time I've edited like a single channel. Because before then, it's like been installed like the loop. Really like invested in the loop. So not to make something that like existed in a time loop was like difficult. But how to like still make it feel like you've just dropped into a space and then been pulled out, and allowing that to have a beginning and an end was a great learning thing for me. And learning new equipment and all that, but that shit's boring, so don't need to talk about that.
No, because I think like that technical question really affects the way, like not just like the way that the output looks, but like the feel of it, right? Like no, that's learning. You can definitely take that. Gabrielle will not bamboozle you again.
Like you didn't learn your lesson the first time.
And then she's got a question for David.
Yeah, this is a nice one to end on.
Yes.
Question number 4, and my final question, is when I was at Berwick Film and Media Arts Festival with Holly 2 weeks ago. Holly mentioned that after the film was shown in Cork Film Festival, that someone has approached David since then to talk about publishing a book. So my question is, what's going to be in the book? What can we expect?
What I see. What I see. What I seeing. Seeing. Looking. Touching.
Hello, it's me again. I'm back, but not for long, because that's all. Thank you for listening. There is a bit of an abrupt ending there. Apologies for that. But yeah, at that point in the event, we opened things up to questions from the audience, and I'm not actually legally sure whether we're allowed to use that recording, even though the question, GDPR and all that, but it's a shame because the questions were really good and Holly's answers were obviously really good as well. So apologies to you. I'm basically just telling you about something that you can't hear, but take my word, it's great. Thank you to everyone that came on the day, to Sirius for the event. Thank you to Miguel Amado for getting us back to chat to Holly, and thank you most of all to Holly, who is just so generous and thoughtful with her answers. Really, really, it's always just a dream to talk to an artist who knows what they do, is willing to think out loud about what they do, and really engage with the questions put before them. I remember actually having a chat with HP before the Q&A, in convo, before the event, and I was kind of running through the questions, some of these are a bit bad, that's a bit of a boring question, but and Holly went, no, there's no such thing as a bad or boring question. Only bad or boring answers. If someone's taken the time to actually engage with your work and think about it enough that they ask you a question, that's amazing, and you should thoughtfully respond to that. And I wish I was that generous. I really do, because sometimes I find myself getting tired with questions that I ask and also questions that I am asked. And I just wish I had that kind of generosity and patience. It's just feels like an admirable quality, or something that... Oh, ow! I just hit my hand. Feels like an admirable quality, but also a quality that makes, thinking about or around the work, or just art in general, art and filmmaking in general, it just makes that a real pleasure to engage with. So hopefully this has been a useful episode of the podcast. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If not, there's always next week. Let's see. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Goodbye.